I worked 55 hours that week. The system logged 35. I had been losing $400 every week for a year and a half, and I had no idea, because the only person who could have told me was the same person stealing it. The kitchen cameras knew. They had known the whole time. My name is Mariana. I am 33 years old. I came to St. Louis from Buenos Aires when I was 26, after my father died, with a culinary diploma and almost no English. I cleaned dishes at a hotel restaurant for 2 years while I worked on my language. I moved up to guard manger at a brasserie. Then I got hired as a sous chef at a small fine dining restaurant on the western edge of downtown called Vitrina. The owner was a man named Marco, who was 61 years old and had opened the place 22 years before with his best friend, the general manager Doug. Doug and Marco had built the restaurant from nothing. Vitrina was the most serious kitchen I had ever worked in. I had been there for 18 months by the time everything happened. I made $52,000 a year on paper. I worked 6 days a week. I worked 15-hour Saturdays without thinking twice about it because the food was beautiful and the senior chef was the best teacher I had ever had. I sent $800 a month to my mother in Argentina. I was tired all the time, but I was tired in the way you are tired when you are building something. I did not mind it. Doug ran the front of house and the back of house. He handled scheduling, payroll, ordering, vendor relationships. Marco owned the restaurant and managed the floor most nights, but he stayed out of operations. He trusted Doug completely. They had been best friends since high school. In late October, I tried to refinance my car loan. The rate I was paying was insane, almost 10% on a 4-year-old Honda, and a new bank in town was offering 5% for service workers with documented income. I went online to gather my last 12 pay stubs to upload to the application. I had not really looked at a pay stub since my first month at Vitrina. I made what I made. The number hit my bank account on the same day every 2 weeks. When I opened the stack of stubs and looked at them carefully for the first time, I noticed something strange. The hours field, the column that said total hours worked, said 35 every single pay period. Sometimes 36. Once 37. Never higher. The pay stubs covered a full year of work. I had worked many 50-hour weeks in that year. I had worked one 80-hour week the December before, during the holiday season, sleeping 4 hours a night for 3 weeks. I sat at my kitchen table and I did the math on a piece of paper. At my hourly rate, which was $28 an hour, the difference between 35 logged hours and the 55 hours I actually worked each week was almost $600 in pre-tax wages. Some weeks more. Over 18 months, the cumulative difference was somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000. Money I had earned. Money that had not arrived in my account. I did not believe it at first. I assumed I was reading the stub wrong. I called my brother in Madrid and asked him to look at the pay stub format. He had worked in restaurants in Spain for 10 years. He confirmed what I was seeing. The 35-hour figure was the figure being submitted to payroll. The rest of my hours had been deleted somewhere upstream. The only upstream was Doug's POS system. He was the only person with access to the timekeeping module. He clocked us in and out himself most nights, on his tablet, because the credit card terminal that doubled as the clock-in station broke 6 months earlier and was never repaired. I sat with this knowledge for 4 days. I did not tell anyone at work. I worked my shifts. I prepped my mise en place. I plated my courses. I did not look at Doug differently because I did not yet know what I was going to do. The problem was simple. I had no proof. The only records of my actual hours were inside Doug's system. My memory was not evidence. My exhaustion was not evidence. The senior chef knew I stayed late, but his memory was also not evidence. If I went to Marco with a complaint, Doug would pull the official logs, show 35 hours per week, and Marco would side with him. Marco trusted Doug. Doug had built the restaurant. I had been there 18 months. The Thursday of the fourth day, I worked an opening to close shift. I prepped from 11 in the morning until service started at 5. I ran the line through service until 10:30. I broke down the station, cleaned, restocked, prepped for Friday morning. I left through the kitchen back door at 11:47 at night. As I was pushing the door open with my hip, with my knife roll under my arm, I looked up at the corner of the ceiling where the back door security camera was mounted. The camera was pointed at the door. The camera had been pointed at the door for the entire 18 months I had worked there. I stopped, and I stood in the doorway, and I thought. We had 6 cameras in the kitchen. They had been installed 3 years before I arrived, for food safety compliance reasons. Marco had told me about them on my first week. He used them to retrain newer staff on hand-washing protocols, knife storage, walk-in temperature logging. The cameras time-stamped every frame. The footage was stored in the cloud for 90 days. Marco had the login. Doug did not have the login, as far as I knew, because the food safety vendor managed it through Marco's restaurant email. I went home and I made coffee at midnight, and I wrote an email to Marco. I did not accuse anyone. I wrote one paragraph. I said, "Hi Marco. I am trying to refinance my car loan, and the income figures on my recent pay stubs do not match what I thought I was earning. I want to make sure my time tracking is accurate. Could you ask Doug to send me my logged hours for the last 90 days, and could we compare them against the kitchen camera entry and exit timestamps for my shifts? I want to make sure nothing has gone wrong on the timekeeping side. I appreciate the help." I sent it at 12:41 in the morning. I went to bed. I did not sleep much. Marco emailed Doug the next morning, with me copied. He asked Doug for the report. Doug replied to the email an hour later and said he would pull it that week. Doug did not pull it that week. He did not pull it the week after. He told me, in person, twice, that he was waiting on the food safety vendor to confirm camera retention. The food safety vendor was a company that managed cloud video storage. They did not need to confirm anything. I knew this. I did not say it. After 3 weeks of stalling, Marco emailed Doug on a Friday afternoon and asked when the report would be ready. Doug said Monday. On Sunday afternoon, Marco called me on my cell phone. I was sitting in my apartment with a cup of coffee, watching the rain. He said, "Mariana, are you sitting down?" I said yes. He told me he had pulled the camera report himself that morning, after waiting 25 days for Doug. He told me that across the 90 days of available footage, my entry and exit timestamps showed an average of 53.2 hours per week in the kitchen, against an average log figure of 36. He told me he had then asked his accountant to run the same comparison for the prior 12 months using the older footage that had been archived to a secondary backup. The pattern was consistent. He told me he had pulled the same comparison for 2 other line cooks, and the figures matched their logged hours within a half hour. The discrepancy was specific to me. He paused. He said, "I will make this right. I will not allow you to be the one to absorb this." Doug was terminated the following Tuesday. The official communication to the staff said he was retiring for personal reasons. The accountant calculated my back wages from the camera footage. The number was $32,500 before taxes. Marco paid it as a single check, plus a $5,000 bonus, plus a written letter of apology that he asked me to keep but not to share. He offered me the position of chef de cuisine the same week, with a raise to $68,000 and a new contract that included guaranteed weekly hours documented in writing. I have never said Doug's name in writing. I do not need to. The cameras already said it. Here's what I learned. The systems that protect a restaurant from a health code violation are the same systems that can document who actually worked the hours. The cameras were installed for one reason. They saved me for a different one. The lesson is not that you should suspect everyone. The lesson is that the infrastructure of any serious workplace is recording quiet evidence all the time. The day you need it, it has been there for years. You just have to remember to ask the right person to look.